Good day, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it may be. We are excited to be joining you again for another series of webinars, all centered around what it means to work with apprentices, to optimize organizations, their company's operations, to work with community, to make sure that companies are operating efficiently. These series of webinars are brought to you by the Supply Chain Automation Workforce Hub, powered by MSG. I am Kimberly Harris, and I'll be joined today in this webinar, which is all about people with disabilities and apprenticeship and career. I'll be joined by Mr. Corey DiBiase, and this is a two-part presentation that we're going to be doing. And in this particular part, we're going to be focusing on what it means to truly ground and understand and engage and empower people with disabilities, keeping in mind that that broad term can mean so many things, but being responsive is always important. So just a little bit about, once again, what we're going to be talking about in this particular phase of this webinar and this installation, part one. We're going to talk about ground on a little bit of talking about people with disabilities, some stats. Who are they in the workforce? How are they showing up? How could they show up? The value proposition of working with this amazing group of community members, people with disabilities specifically as it pertains to apprenticeships, and then engaging employees with disabilities. And that is not a one-stop proposition, right? Because just like so many other facets of our community, disabilities mean different things. And it is definitely important for us to be aware of that and have a responsive toolkit to be able to interface, engage, work with, and optimize the productivity of that amazing group of individuals. So just some key statistics as we ground on people with disabilities in the workforce and in apprenticeships in particular. We're thinking about the fact that keeping in mind that there are millions of businesses that are the backbone of our nation, and nearly 2 million of those businesses are wholly or in part owned by people with disabilities. And we're talking about folks who are bringing in and have about $500 billion in disposable income. And so when we think about, disabilities as a universal concept, we're talking about nearly a fifth of our population having some sort of disability. It could be physical, it could be emotional, it could be neurological, some other facet, but roughly 1 in 5 individuals. And as recently as 2024, almost, well, over a fifth, around 23% of people with disabilities were employed in the United States. But yet this is around still 40 points below the 65.5% rate for workers without disabilities. So there's definitely some underrepresentation there. And with that underrepresentation too, are opportunities that are not really being taken advantage of to really engage in human-centered ways, a population that can help us to learn so much more about how we do the work that we do more efficiently in ways that may benefit individuals with disabilities, but benefit and prioritize all of us. So we'll talk about what does it mean to really work with intentionality, to really be responsive to the needs of individuals with disabilities in the workforce, keeping in mind and appreciating the fact that when we are responsive to their needs, we are, and the numbers show, creating an environment that facilitates higher productivity for us all. So with that in mind, um, as we're looking at these stats, as we're thinking about these stats, and we talked about that underrepresented component, people with disabilities make up just over 1% of all the registered apprentices. So when we talk about employment and then apprenticeships in particular, we see that the underrepresentation is even more acute. And since about 2017 or so, the number of apprentices with disabilities has increased by quite a bit, but the underrepresentation, the severe underrepresentation still remains. And it's really important to keep in mind that about a third of adults with disabilities report, I should say, mental distress. And so a lot of that can be attributed to several different things, some of which we'll tap into. But it's once again keeping in mind the more responsive that we can be to individuals who have these disabilities, we are creating an environment that is conducive for all workers. And with that in mind, what are people with disabilities seeking? I don't think it would be a backhanded thing to say they're seeking nothing different than what any of us are seeking. Environments that are conducive for us to come to work within our full selves, in our authentic selves, and be productive. To know that our contributions are valuable, to know that that they matter, and that they help to move the organization forward. So what do some of those things look like? Accessible, supportive workplaces, excuse me, that have a universal design, that really make workplaces more efficient, that make workplaces more conducive for all bodies and all individuals to show up and work their best. Pathways to economic security for sure. Paid work-based learning opportunities such as apprenticeships, industry credentialing and stackable credentials, and all of the other training and development opportunities that help ensure that individuals with disabilities included, are on a pathway to economic security. Definitely mentorship and peer support, and also protection of public benefits. Wanting to ensure that as cost benefit analysis are conducted and the pros and the cons are weighed, that those marginal increases in the short term that may be present when we're talking about crafting environments that enable individuals with disabilities to thrive, that we don't lose sight of the fact that we're also creating environments that enable all people to thrive. And once again, as I said before, we'll talk about that more. And also, too, the value proposition that comes from really tapping into this untapped pool of talent, lived experience, genius, a way of seeing the world and knowing the world that is born out of the challenges and the realities that individuals navigate. So that is one thing to definitely be mindful of, is that untapped talent pool, and the wide and how wider intentional responsive outreach can definitely help and play a part in shrinking that divide. And in doing so, making companies more competitive and making companies more responsive and able to take advantage of the opportunities in the marketplace. Also, too, compliance and innovation, higher retention and engagement. It's important to point out the fact that people with disabilities report nearly one-third fewer turnover rates as opposed to individuals without, right? So definitely, and we all know and can appreciate, there is a true cost that comes with turnover. There is the outreach cost, there is the training cost, there is the cost from the onboarding process and the productivity that slows. And when we can make sure, when we can do things to ensure that we are creating in environments where we reduce the likelihood of individuals trading out, and instead growing and thriving in the company, we also can reduce some of those very expensive costs that come with always having to be in a churn of outreach, recruitment, training, and so forth. And then also, to another value proposition is that of brand leadership. Organizations that really are in, proactive and champion disability hiring, improve their brand. They have credibility in terms of consumer trust, and they become organizations that really can enjoy a certain level of brand loyalty. The organizations that don't have that connection don't really or aren't really able to enjoy. And as it pertains to the different types of disabilities, as we said before, we're talking about a place and space and a reality that is not, zeros or ones or this and not that. It is a spectrum, just like any other reality and that we've talked about and haven't talked about. There are all types of disabilities. We know at least 1 in 5 individuals report or have been diagnosed, and those numbers could be even greater. Disabilities could be physical, they could be learning, they could be neurological, they could be some combination. But it is important to keep in mind that when we're talking about accommodation and awareness and outreach and responsiveness, that we don't pigeonhole ourselves into basically typecasting, if you will, or thinking about one type of persona. Disabilities come in a wide array of types. And even though if we have not taken the time to be intentional around thinking about what those types are, and then haven't done the planning and the preparation that goes along with that, it can seem a bit challenging, right? To think about how do you effectively engage? What is the value that an individual with a particular type of disability, what can they bring to our organization? Oftentimes, and we'll get to that in the evaluation piece in just a bit later, it requires us being ever so mindful of engaging, having outreach, being vulnerable to say, we have areas of not knowing that it really would make sense to truly lean into, lean on, reach out to, ask for the wisdom and the guidance of individuals with disabilities to help us plan our mentorship programs and other programs that make our organizations more effective. And just to kind of wrap up looking and thinking about the spectrum of different disabilities, the different types of disabilities, there are also the mental health and trauma related disabilities. Not all disabilities are an artifact of genetics. Some are an artifact of the experiences that we've had throughout our life course. And if you watched any of the previous webinars that we've done, Corey DiBiase does an amazing job talking about trauma-informed care, different types of approaches and interventions, and things just to ideate around that can help as we think about trauma-related disabilities. So with that in mind, I'm going to lob it over to Corey to guide us through the next section here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harris. Wonderful to be back in the studio with you and laying down these wonderful tracks of great information and wisdom here. So I want to build on all that great content that Kim set us up with and just talk kind of in the abstract about what is a disability. So this isn't about diagnosis. This isn't about any of those kind of details. This is about, okay, if we are running a registered apprenticeship program, if we are an employer, if we are a colleague, what does it mean when we're talking about disability, and how does disability kind of factor into someone's life? Well, there are a couple different answers to that, and needless to say, this is going to very much be determined by the individual themselves. So how I regard myself as a person with a disability, that's up to me. This is just kind of setting the stage or setting the kind of boundary lines for what those identity factors typically entail. So on the one hand, we can say, like, perhaps as a person with a disability, we're thinking about this disability as something that's really integral to my identity. And by the way, I'll talk a little bit more about this later in the session. I don't consider myself. I am a person with a disability. And so we'll be talking a bit more about that. But just to give some frame as I'm discussing some of these things here, sometimes we think about this as really an aspect of identity, something that really matters to someone in saying, this is who I am. This is what my life experience is all about. Maybe I want to get together with other folks with similar life experiences. Maybe just like folks can see my last name, I'm someone of Italian descent. Maybe maybe that to me is something that's really important to my identity. I go to social clubs where we're talking about this. I'm trying to learn the language. I'm really involved in the history. I'm really involved in the culture. Or maybe it's just like, well, yeah, My grandpop came over through Ellis Island, but now I'm living my own life. That's really not that important to me anymore. Again, all this is very much part of someone's individual experience, someone's individual preferences. So we might see folks saying, "Okay, yes, this is a big part of my identity. I want to talk about the challenges it entails. I want to talk about the unique experiences, the positive things that this entails." And there are positive things. We can sometimes get very negative in the way we talk about disability, when in fact it, just like any other factor of life, it's a lot more nuanced, a lot more complex than that. And maybe I want to get together with other folks and talk about legal changes, policy changes, practice changes, shifting folks' perceptions that are going to affect me. Maybe I want to think about myself as a person with a disability in that way. Or maybe I don't. Again, this is very much dependent on any given individual's preferences. What disability also certainly will be in any case is some kind of functional factor. It's going to matter in terms of how I think about how I perform my job, what kind of jobs I am matched with, what kind of opportunities will make the most sense for me. Maybe I need to think about a physical factor of my physical body that is either a limitation or simply a factor. It could just be something we need to consider that's going to affect my performance, going to affect my need for the physical space around me. Maybe it's something like that. Maybe it's a factor that changes how I perceive other people, how I perceive the world around me, how I learn new information, how I express myself. Maybe it's all about that exchange of information. Maybe a sort of another category here, maybe this is something that more affects my emotions, my social affect, my relationships. This, by the way, this last category is very much where I'm at. Someone who experiences depression, someone who experiences anxiety. This is part of my experience, and this is just, these are things I need to think about. If I put that fact completely to the side, I don't think about it at all, well, we know that's going to have consequences, right? So when we think about this purely from a functional sense, this is where we start thinking about what are someone's needs going to be in the workplace? What is going to be a good match, both in terms of the quote unquote hard skills of a job, and then, but probably even more so, all those soft skills, quote unquote soft skills, that surround a job. And what does it mean to maintain social relationships in the workplace? What does it mean to have a relationship with my supervisor? What does it mean to be able to constructively criticize my colleagues and be able to receive constructive criticism without that really derailing me? All those kinds of things, right? However, what we know, so if those are kind of two broad categories of things that disabilities are or may be, here's something that disability is not. Disability is not a consistent and reliable predictor of career preference. It is not a consistent and reliable predictor of performance, and it is not a consistent and reliable predictor of future aptitude. As someone who's done a lot of work early in my career as a job developer for folks with disabilities, talking with employers about what this will mean, the number of times I heard someone say, well, the work we do here is really hard. The work we do here is really intense. The work we do here is going to require a lot of hours. I don't think someone with a disability would be an appropriate fit. Now, we know, obviously, when we hear something like that, there are a lot of assumptions being made. I don't even think necessarily being made maliciously. Let's just set that aside, say this is just someone making some assumptions. But we can't do that. We know that disability does not tell us that, no, this thing is not going to be possible for someone. On the flip side, sometimes we kind of get ideas in our head about like, oh, well, Corey has this kind of disability. Maybe this kind of job will be a great fit for him. I'll use an example and this is not based on my own experience, but there's certainly one I've heard said and discussed a lot by folks who do have this direct life experience. Folks who are on the autism spectrum. I hear a lot of folks saying, wow, wouldn't they be great in kind of computer programming and data design and IT kind of roles where that attention to detail and all that precision and that real compulsion to make sure single thing is exactly right. That's going to be a great fit for someone on the autism spectrum. And, maybe it's going to be a good fit for some of their social preferences as well. Now, in responding to that, let me first of all say, that may be the case that someone on the autism spectrum would love to be a programmer. But that's not going to be based on the fact that they're on the autism spectrum. That's going to be based on the fact that that's something they want to do. Just like I have things that I want to do and I have things that I don't want to do. Right? So we need to root ourselves in what are someone's preferences? What are someone's interests? What are someone's talent? The minute we start saying, well, Corey has this kind of disability, so we know he can't do this kind of job, well, that's that we're probably making some mistakes there. We're at least making some difficult assumptions. But the flip side, could we say, oh, Corey has this disability? He'd be a great fit for this other job. No, disability does not point us in that direction. Disability at most is that functional factor we need to consider. Everything else, we need to get to know the individual's interests, the individual's talents. That's how we make these kinds of connections. So now let's continue this conversation by talking about how do we engage folks with disabilities in apprenticeships and in careers more generally? How do we think about that? How do we make this work so that, as Dr. Harris was telling us, we can take full advantage of this very talented group of folks who certainly have quite a bit to offer to the job marketplace, quite a bit to offer to the economy. How do we make those connections work? So to talk about that, let's start by talking about Harold here. Harold, of course, is a theoretical person, but that's all right. Some things that we want to know about Harold. Harold uses a wheelchair. Harold's arm movements are what we can call atypical. Whatever that means, is just the way his body moves just doesn't look like it looks when for the majority of the rest of us. He can use a standard office computer, phone setup. All that stuff is perfectly fine. That all works, no problem. His speech can sometimes be difficult for other folks to understand. So just something, as you get to know him at people, he is less and less of a factor. But first, when we're first talking with Harold, maybe it's going to be a little hard to understand what he's conveying. And here's the kicker, our last one here. This might be one of the most important factors. Other staff, as we watch Harold in the office, we see that other staff are really uncertain how to interact with him. So they're maybe acting very cautiously, maybe very hesitant to interact at all. And of course, we can see that is going to be a problem that we cannot just let pass. We need to make sure that folks do feel comfortable, just like we would want any member of our team to feel fully a part of that team and fully respected within that team. So what are we going to do to help support Harold in this opportunity that he has here? First of all, physically accessible workplace is going to be necessary for Harold. If you've got to go up 2 flights of stairs to get to Harold's office, as someone who uses a wheelchair, we simply know that's not going to work. So there are going to be certain aspects of the design of our physical space that are going to matter, but we also know that more generally, that we're going to have to be thinking about potentially other accommodations. Maybe there's other equipment. Maybe there's other tech. Maybe there are other adjustments that we can make that are going to make this workplace more appropriate for Harold, more appropriate for his needs. So we want to make sure right off the bat that there's a process to request accommodations and support, and we want to make sure that process is clear to all employees. Now, we might, with Harold here, we might look at Harold and say, okay, we know that we need to be thinking about this for Harold, but we want to make sure that this does not depend on my knowing something about someone in advance, my perceiving that Harold needs accommodations, because we're not always going to perceive that, right? We're not always going to see that. So we need to make sure that every single employee, Kim, Dave, who's producing this session, Bob, who's watching the session right now. Bob, I see you. I see you. And you're welcome. It's great to have you here, Bob. All of us, every one of us as employees, to be equally equipped with the knowledge of how we make an accommodation request, what that process is. That's got to be there for everybody. And of course, as we see here, accommodation and accessible technology may help Harold be more efficient and effective in his work. Of course, the person who's going to be able to tell us the most about that is probably going to be Harold himself, right? Harold has been interacting with the world for a long time. So he's going to know what's going to make things more comfortable for him. That might also evolve as Harold's role evolves, as Harold himself changes as he goes through his life. Those things might change. All that might change. That's fine. We just need to be absolutely certain that Harold knows, hey, we're here, we're ready to listen. We want to know how we can be supportive to make sure that Harold is as comfortable and working as efficiently and effectively as he possibly can. Um, Finally, when we think about that, okay, we see other staff are kind of hesitant to interact with Harold. I'm going to go ahead and guess that that's not because everybody else is mean. That's not because everybody else doesn't like Harold. There's just a level of discomfort, right? So we know that those interactions are likely being affected by other staff, their assumptions, their lack of knowledge about disability, their lack of experience working with folks with disabilities. So a lot of this, when we talk about how we support Harold, we're actually talking about things that we need to do to support everyone else, not just Harold, because there are factors here that have almost nothing to do with Harold at all, other than people's perceptions, people's assumptions, all that kind of good stuff. So where are we going to go from here? Let's find out. So first of all, let's talk about accessibility, accommodation, and as Dr. Harris was mentioning before, the notion of universal design. Um, so first of all, as we said before, employees must decide for themselves what accommodations they need and can benefit from. They are going to be the guides here. They're going to help us figure this stuff out and tell us what they need. And when we think about accommodations, what is an accommodation? Accommodations first of all, excuse me, provided for individual employees to improve their access, their comfort, and their efficiency. So I think a lot of us probably use what we could call access technology, accessible technology. We just don't think of it that way. It's we think of it as efficiency tools. Well, the line between an efficiency tool and an accessibility tool, it's a pretty thin line in most cases, right? So this is all just about making someone more comfortable, more efficient. Of course, accommodations take a variety of form, from technology or equipment. They can also take the form of changes in schedule. What if someone, really struggles in the morning for whatever reason? They just aren't as efficient in the morning, but by the afternoon and the evening, boy, they're in the zone now. They're doing great work. Well, can we adapt the schedule to make it fit better for them? That's an accommodation. Schedule changes can be an accommodation. The way we assign tasks. Okay, Dr. Harris, what are you really good at? What am I really good at? How do we break up these tasks? How do we make sure that we're both matched with the tasks we're most suited to? That can also be an accommodation, right? Um, uh, uh, Now, and again, if we think about accommodations in terms of access and just basically helping someone through the door and be part of a physical workplace, but we also know, as we said, that it's much more than that. It's about efficiency, comfort, preferred learning style, all those kinds of interactions. Now, we can look, there are some great resources on accommodations. So again, we start by asking Harold, what does Harold need? But maybe Harold doesn't know. Maybe we're in a new territory where he's got to do some kind of new task he's not really aware of, doesn't know what technology is available. Well, guess what? There are experts that are going to help us with this. So we can look at askjan.org. We can look at askearn.org. Those are both DOL sponsored projects. JAN is the Job Accommodations Network. These folks are experts on accommodations, accessible technology, and not just physical, but accommodating mental health, as we'll talk about in the second session that Dr. Harris referenced before. Accommodating episodic disabilities, accommodating temporary disabilities, accommodating all different kinds of things. These folks know this material very, very well and can guide and support Harold. We often also see that in most states, there's a state office or a university funded program or a not-for-profit center that's there to provide these services and supports as well. So we do see that a fair amount, not in every state, but we do see that. So we want to search on our own state basis as well when we're looking for these kinds of supports. Next thing to talk about is universal design. Now, when we talk about accommodations, that's typically something that's very much there for an individual, right? Harold uses a wheelchair. That is an individual accommodation for Harold, right? Well, universal design kind of looks at the flip side. It kind of looks at like, okay, what can we do in this environment to make this environment as inherently accessible as it can possibly be? How do we look at our physical spaces, technology, the way we teach our staff, the way we disseminate information to our staff to ensure that it meets the needs of as wide a range of different folks as possible? So we can look at all these different opportunities to create a workplace that, as it says here, is open, welcoming, and accessible as it can possibly be. And you see, this is anyone who's done any of these has heard some of this disability information in the past. I'm sure you know where I'm going to go with the curb cut example, but the curb cut is one of the ultimate expressions of universal design in physical space. So we think about, okay, someone, and this was not too long ago in our history, someone using a wheelchair. Harold is using a wheelchair. He's going down the sidewalk. He gets to the edge of he gets to the corner. Well, now there's suddenly a drop off. Again, this is hopefully in the past. This hopefully is not the case anymore in most places. But it used to be that, okay, well, now Harold's got to somehow negotiate 6, 7, 8 inch drop from the sidewalk to the street. And then he's going to have to negotiate that again on the other side to get back up on the street. Well, so what do we do here, right? What we do is curb cuts, plain and simple. We just eliminate that curb. It's a nice, easy grade that someone can just go on and off the curb without any issue whatsoever. Now, for Harold, this is necessary. For someone using a wheelchair, this is necessary. Let's think about what it does to the overall environment, right? To the overall environment of this physical space. Well, it's good for Harold, but it's also good for someone who's pushing a shopping cart or a baby carriage. It's good for someone who travels a lot. And to folks remember when luggage did not have wheels on it, when you had to carry the things around. I remember that. That's how I started out when I was first traveling, is I was carrying stuff around. Well, you know why we have wheels on suitcases now? We have wheels on suitcases because of curb cuts. Because I know that even in my little town here in Montana, I can walk down the street with a suitcase pulling it along, and I'm going to very gently go along. So Harold needs this, and Harold's been accommodated by this universal intervention, but so has a mother pushing a stroller. So has Corey when he's going to the airport trying to get along and not have to pull that big suitcase up over the curb every time. It's benefiting skater punts. It's benefiting all different kinds of people. It's a change that is going to make the environment generally better, generally more accessible for all folks. Universal design for learning. Now, this is kind of taking the same idea and applying it to information. The idea of universal design is to promote information sharing that inherently engages all different kinds of learners. Now, set aside disability, we all learn in different ways, right? Some of us need to do stuff. Some of us need to get our hands on things, and that's how we learn. Some of us read. Some of us want a conversation. Some of us want to watch something, want to see a demonstration. Doesn't matter. That's all going to be different. That's going to be different for each one of us. Are we sure that we as an organization, when we're disseminating information, are meeting all those different needs, right? And again, this is not necessarily about accommodating individuals. This is not technology that I use to okay, this is what Harold needs. This is me saying, okay, every time we send information out to the rest of this company, I want to make sure that it's done in a way that Corey is going to feel engaged, Dr. Harris is going to feel engaged, Dave, Bob, glad you're still with us, Bob, watching this. We're all going to be engaged, right? That's what we're thinking about in advance. Now, we're just scratching the surface of universal design for learning, but there's just a bunch of great information. And once you kind of see it, it's become so obvious that it's very easy to incorporate. These are not high-level concepts that we're going to have to study for years and years and years to figure this out. So if, for example, we have a staff training, we're just going to inherently say, okay, we're going to provide information for folks who want to just listen and learn. We're going to provide information in a written way so that folks who want to take something home and study it, they have that. We're going to provide activities that allow us to work individually or in teams to learn a new skill. This is not some brand new idea. This is just a matter of saying that just like in our physical spaces, we want our information space to be as open and appropriate and engaging for as many folks as possible. Now, folks have probably heard about this, and this isn't where we start thinking about, we're talking about all of Harold's colleagues feel, maybe it seems like they're a little uncomfortable. Okay, so what do we do about that? Probably folks have heard about one brand or one version or another of what we call disability awareness training that we would offer within a company, that we would offer for our staff, for our leadership, all that kind of stuff. the basic idea here, and some of us who've done this work for a long time, we sometimes talk about this as quote unquote disability 101. Maybe that sounds a little flippant to folks, but that's just kind of a colloquial term that we sometimes use. The idea here is this is training that we would offer to our staff, to other participants in a registered apprenticeship program, to our mentors, to our leadership. It's just a basic understanding of issues related to disability. So, of course, a training like this is going to talk about accommodations, about universal design, about these disability basics. Our theme here, though, what we're trying to get to, this is not a word I'm fond of, but I think folks know where I'm going with this. What we want to try and do here is to quote unquote normalize the idea of disability. We don't want folks thinking like, okay, I need to learn all these new rules. When I go talk to Harold, I've got to remember I can say this, but I can't say that. I can do this, but I can't do that. I've got to make sure I do this. Don't do that. Blah, 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 blah. No, the bottom line here should be that if we're doing a training about quote unquote people with disabilities, that people come out of that training thinking, oh, the thing I should be worried about is the people part, not the disability part. The disability part will figure out. I should just go talk to Harold because he's a person. He's my colleague. He's my he's on this team, or he's in another team, or I just happen to see him in the lunchroom. As a human being, one human being to another, we should connect, we should talk. That's the bottom line here, is that we should get away from thinking, boy, this is so hard. We don't want to make any mistakes. We don't do the wrong thing. We need to just get to the point where we're thinking, oh, folks with disabilities are just like everybody else in this office that we have here, and a lot of different kinds of people, a lot of different kinds of preferences, different kinds of ways that we go about our work. But at the end of the day, we're all just folk. We're all just people doing what we got to do here, right? Now, ideally, when we have these done, and I'll talk about some resources of places we might go in the community to help us put together a training like this, if we wanted to do that for our registered apprenticeship, for our staff, for our company. But ideally, in my opinion, you want these to be conducted by a person with a disability. So I want someone who is up there not talking about folks with disabilities in the abstract. I want someone who's talking about their experience and able to reflect on that. Now, within that, as I said before, I'm a person with a disability. I experience some mental health factors, again, mostly related to depression and anxiety. That doesn't really tell me a lot. That my life experience doesn't tell me a lot about Harold's life experience. I don't know what it means to rely on a wheelchair to access the physical world around me. So there is no universal disability kind of like, well, this represents all folks with disabilities. Of course not. Folks with disabilities are all different, just like the rest of us. But still, again, the basic idea that, well, excuse me, I'll put this the way the field itself puts it. If you talk to folks who are disability advocates, they use a phrase, a wonderful phrase: nothing about us without us. So let's not get in a room. Let's get 5 people together in a room talking about our staff with disabilities, but not including staff with disabilities, right? Let's make sure that voice is there in just the same way that it would be if we were thinking about any other group, any other factor of identity. Let's make sure that people are representing themselves part of this conversation. And needless to say, if part of what we want to do is, again, I don't like the word, but normalize this, get people to stop thinking about this as this very different, very very new kind of thing in their lives. If I want to just normalize the way we talk about disability, well, having someone with a disability talk about themselves, talk about this experience, can really can just set the stage for us as a group to then be able to continue that conversation in a very open, honest, and engaged kind of fashion, right? Now, this last thing here, and as she always does, Dr. Harris really set the stage for talking about this as well. The point I always want to make when we're talking about hiring, retaining, and promoting folks with disabilities, if we as a company, if we as a registered apprenticeship program, if we as an organization are good at this, if we are good at hiring, retaining, training, and promoting folks with disabilities, you know what? we're just going to inherently be better at a lot of things. This is a good thing to know how to do, not just for people with disabilities. Now, yes, for our staff with disability that we want to recruit, our apprentices with disabilities that we want to recruit, our customers, 20% of the population customers that we want to recruit, unless we just, as a for-profit business, say, 20% of the population, that doesn't matter to me. No, it matters to me, right? So if we're thinking about that on that level, that's all important. But it even goes beyond that. So because when we're thinking about disability and supporting and accommodating disability, we're thinking about cultivating a welcoming, comfortable, and efficient physical environment, welcoming, comfortable, and efficient technological interfaces, skill development, training, dissemination, information dissemination, our presence on the web. All of those things are going to be more welcoming, more comfortable, more efficient, more accessible. Not just, again, not just for people with disabilities, but for all people. Go back to that curb cut example, right? Yes, we are benefiting Harold by doing this. We're also benefiting that skater punk who we want to be our customer. We're also benefiting that mother or father pushing the stroller along. We're benefiting Corey as he's muttering, looking at his phone, trying to get to the airport, pulling his luggage along. But we're making our presence better, more welcoming, more comfortable, more efficient. It's going to compel, our next point here, it's going to compel creativity and thoughtfulness in terms of how we think about someone's skills, how we think about their interests, their competencies, and then how we take those and how we assemble teams. This is going to give us the opportunity to think more creatively about, okay, how do we take Corey's talents? How do we take Dr. Harris's talents? How do we take Robin's talents, Dave's talents, Bob? I see you, Bob. How do we get all those folks together and really make sure that we are getting the most out of them, putting them in the best possible position to succeed? Thinking about matching someone with a disability to the right kind of career choice for them and helping them succeed in that. Those are all the same skills that are going to help me take anyone, any member of my team, and think the most creatively and insightfully about how I can use their talent and put them in the best possible position to succeed. These are not two different tasks. This is the same thing, bringing these ideas together to ensure that we're creating the best combination of talents, combination of teams possible. This is going to help managers and staff be better communicators, right? This is, if we are better at talking with Harold, if we're better at engaging Harold and training Harold and supervising Harold and working with Harold and a team being supervised by Harold, well, we're just better communicators now. And lo and behold, being a good communicator, that's going to help you out pretty much no matter what, right? And then finally, as we alluded to earlier, just the simple fact of our doing this, I don't know if folks are aware, if folks remember Walgreens did a real push to ensure it, and it was a very public push, and we appreciated that. The notion of, we want people with disabilities working for this company. We're gonna really make this an emphasis. We're gonna recruit folks. We're gonna accommodate folks. We're gonna do what we have to do to hire, retain, and promote folks with disabilities. Well, lo and behold, as someone who spends a good amount of time talking to folks in the disability community, this made an impression. And suddenly, the number of individuals and parents and family members and just friends, friends and colleagues who would say, you know what? Walgreens is all the way across town, but I know what they're doing for folks with disabilities. I can go to Walgreens to pick up my prescriptions, even though it's an extra half an hour to get there, because I believe in what they're doing and it's important to me. So that demonstration has a very bottom line, very real impact on any kind of business that we'd be thinking about conducting, right? So some of our partners in the community, I kind of kept referencing that there are folks that we can turn to in the community who might help us think through some of these things, right? Well, so who are some of these partners who are going to talk about how we support folks, how we accommodate folks, how we include, engage folks? Also going to talk about how we can recruit folks as well. The first of these, and I think this is a really, really underknown resource, but the Centers for Independent Living. You can find these in every state and in a lot of communities. Sometimes, like here in Montana, you kind of got to go to our more major metropolitan areas, quote unquote, here in Montana to find these places, but they serve the entire regions. So the idea of a center for independent living, that these are kind of peer support centers. They are typically run by people with disabilities. They are there for people with disabilities. They're there for folks who, we talked before about those peer connections. Folks want to come in and make connections and speak with one another. They can do that here. They're typically a great source of support for disability awareness. If we want to have one of those trainings, a Center for Independent Living, they're probably going to know how to do that. That might be a service that we need to pay for, but there's nothing wrong with that, right? Most companies, most registered apprenticeship programs, we pay for this kind of training because it's valuable for folks with disabilities and for others as well. Well, a Center for Independent Living can be a great source because, again, this is a place led by and which is designed for folks with disabilities. And we've got a link here in the PowerPoint, but you can also just typically Google Center for Independent Living. Sometimes they're also called independent living centers, but you should typically be able to find these in your community here. Vocational rehabilitation, I think more folks will have heard of that, but this is a workforce development agency specifically designed to support folks with disabilities. They are therefore, of course, a great source for recruitment. They're a great source for apprenticeship candidates. They're a great source for employment and career candidates. And it's going to be a great way for us to make those connections. Also, as a workforce development agency, they often are great sources of information on accommodations, job matching. I was talking before about how we construct our teams and really emphasize people's strengths to the greatest extent possible. Voc Rehab should be very good at that. That's something they should be able to help us with. Now, this last thing here, we don't want to go too far into this because this is kind of a complicated subject, but Dr. Harris did raise this earlier, and this is the question of benefits management. Now, folks with disabilities often depend on Social Security benefits for their health insurance. Now, for a person with a disability who's not working, not receiving other forms of income, they might also receive some cash support. Obviously, it's not cash, but you get my point. There might be a pretty limited monetary support that comes with that. Now, of course, for someone who is employed, that the quote unquote cash benefits, the monetary benefit is not going to be as important. That's going to be replaced. However, when someone starts to get income, that might put those medical benefits at risk because, of course, they're pinned to income, right? So we want to be sure that folks have the resources to plan for that in advance, because in 99% of cases, someone absolutely can work, they absolutely can be receiving income while still maintaining those medical benefits that they might depend on, which for some folks, these are going to be, this isn't like, oh, good, I need someone to cover my annual checkup here. This might be, medical care that is very important to them, that they need pretty intensively for much of their lives. Again, different for everyone in different situations, of course. We know that many folks with disabilities can't simply just give up these medical benefits and hope that they will be replaced by other benefits. We know we need to maintain those. All by way of saying what we want to look for are work incentives, planning, and assistance specialists, which are available in every single state. And this is not something which we as employers or registered apprenticeship folks need to get involved in. This is just if our employees or our candidates are worried about this, we can say, hey, this is a great resource. We're going to help you plan these benefits out, put things in place to make sure that you're going to be taken care of, even as you're gaining income, so that it's not just kind of an abstract worry. This is something we can actually respond to. So again, if we're an employer, if we're a registered apprenticeship manager, we shouldn't be getting, this is someone's own individual personal business, but we want to make sure we know about these resources, can provide them so that folks feel that support and are able to navigate that sometimes difficult, certainly always complex question, because we're talking about Social Security benefits and all these other things. We know we need some experts to help us with all of that good stuff. But that brings me to the end of this. So I'm going to hand things back to my esteemed colleague, Dr. Harris, to talk, as we always do, about, okay, here's all this stuff that Corey was talking about. How do we actually know whether we're doing this right or not? How do we actually know whether we're having the impact we want to have? Well, I don't know. But I know who does know, and that is my friend, Dr. Harris. Dr. Harris, take it away.
Thank you so much, Corey, for that. And as always, the perfect, my analogies can be challenging at times, but the perfect setup. I'm thinking about basketball, I think. But anyway, to really just dovetail us into this part of our conversation, we've talked about the why, the what. We've talked about all of the importance of it. Now we're going to get into a little bit of the how. If you've been with us over the course of these webinars, one of the things that that we anchor them all with is a conversation around why is the evaluation component of this so important? What does it bring to the thing that it is that we're trying to achieve? And it's no different as we think about this and think about individuals with disabilities, and the value that they can bring to our organizations, and how do we, with intentionality, create an environment that is that there with systematic components built into it and responsive components that are systematic built into it that enable that to actually happen. So as if you've been with us over the arc of our journey, you know that we've talked about the importance of all of these different facets that you see here, grounding on intent. What does it mean to do or to engage in successful outreach and recruitment? What does it mean then after you've done that to then successfully onboard a candidate and an apprentice? Then to integrate them into the organization and for them to have ongoing development and ultimately successful performance, right? As I'm reflecting on the conversation that we've had today thus far, we talk about the fact that when you think about holistically, right? All of the individuals that are impacted by and who impact our organization and what it is that we do. And when you, with intentionality, consider them, keep them in mind, and it's not enough just to keep them in mind, but also have them in the room where it happens, if you will. I love that Corey lifted up the nothing about us without us, right? It is being intentional about that. But all of those things require that we are first clear in what it is that we're aiming toward. And then we have a plan that we don't create in a silo. As Corey said, we co-create that with stakeholders. And then we evaluate the plan and learn from the evaluation process. And that is the how component. And we're going to talk about that as we think through, the individuals with disabilities, from outreach to thriving. So from bringing them into the organization, how do we message? What is that onboarding process like? How do we ensure that they are growing and thriving in their organization of choice? Keep in mind what we talked about before, that low attrition rate that we think of and that we know per the research that is associated with individuals with disabilities. So we want these individuals, our teammates, our community members, to enter into this space, bringing their total sales and thriving in that space. So as we think about the what it takes to achieve these successful outcomes, we have to think through these different steps. What is it that we're thinking about in terms of data collection, our sources of data, how we analyze the data, even what questions to ask, are going to all be things that we think about as we think about evaluating the current program. And then as we go from there, thinking about creating a plan, not in a silo, once again, but a plan informed by all that we've learned from previous evaluations, especially when we're endeavoring to build out, to scale up or out, to introduce a new component to our apprenticeship work or whatever the work is that we're doing. We want to make sure that we have people at the table in the room with the subject matter expertise to appropriately, to effectively advise, counsel, share insight on those things. And that is where we need to have individuals with lived experience, not just in terms of the type of work, but actually the type of candidate that we're looking to recruit. Now, Corey talked a lot about this notion, this concept of universal design. What does it mean to conceptualize and execute a plan and build out a plan, be it a physical space or a learning package or tool that really takes into considerations the many different ways that people enter into a space, the many different ways in which folks learn, do, produce, all the things. And when we're thinking about co-creating this plan to really inform a really good and successful, efficacious apprenticeship program for individuals with disabilities, we want to co-create a plan that is informed by their wisdom. We want to co-create a plan that optimally, in many cases, can be led by their wisdom. And that means having their voice in the place, in the room, as we are conceptualizing, as we are executing, as we are actually bringing it to life. So then after we do all of that, it is important to document that process. We want to chronicle the learnings from every stage in this process so that we have something that other teams, that if we need to modify, we have something in place that can help us to do just that. So thinking about what is it to achieve these successful outcomes, we have to be ever mindful of the what, the why, the different things that we've done in the past that may inform the steps that we're taking, but also the who, and that helps to inform the how. So this is all about good evaluation. We've talked about the fact that, good evaluation is going to help us to make our hits a lot more frequent and our misses a lot less hurtful, right? And it's going to also give us a playbook that we can utilize to replicate good practice. And when we're thinking about our community members, individuals with disabilities, we need to be thinking about them and talking to them and being led by them so that we can ensure that we're doing just that. So, as we think about questions for us to ponder, questions to consider, we need to be thinking about that holistic view, taking that all into consideration. What are the factors that we need to be mindful of to shape to that are going to be shaping the strategies that we employ, the steps that we take. How frequently do we need to be thinking about keeping in mind things like how do we disclose? What do we disclose? And who are we in consultation with to make sure that we're getting those things right? We need to also be thinking about what types of accommodations do we need to be offering. Maybe they're not all physical. Corey did a great job lifting up some of the things that really may be an artifact of neurodivergence. People learn differently. People process differently. And the other question to ask is, what are the opportunities for us to learn, to really tap into that genius, but the genius that's in that difference to help our organizations run more efficiently? So all of these are questions that we need to be considering. All questions are good questions, but the only thing that or not, I shouldn't say the only thing, but one of the essential things, I should say, that we should be ever mindful of is who is in the room with us when we're having those critical conversations. Because if the right people are not in the room, we aren't even sure, we can't be assured that we're even asking the right questions. So we definitely want to make sure that not only are we in a posture to sit deeply with these things, ask questions, and learn from these processes, but we have invited in the right stakeholders to help us with this process. So just as we are wrapping up this particular phase or this particular component of our webinar series, this particular installation, part one, just some things to keep in mind. We're going to be coming back at you pretty soon with part two of this. And then we'll also have some other webinars that are in the pipeline that we're going to also be talking about this similarly themed content where once again, whatever priority population we're talking about in any given webinar, it is so important, as Corey said, that we're ever mindful of the fact that when we are thinking about what does it mean to evaluate the efficacy of this intervention, we can't ask all the right questions if the right people are not in the room. We need to be guided by those people. We need to get wisdom from those people. We have to be led by those people so that we can know where to look and what to do with the wealth of information that they bring to us. How do we handle that? What do we do with it? So we'll have more of these conversations coming up in the near future. And as always, we ask and we implore and we invite you to please check out the newsletters that we generate and send out, where you can learn about all of the great learnings, activities, things that we're doing, and who we're doing those things with as it pertains to apprenticeships in this space. Please don't hesitate to email Corey DiBiase. You see his email address there. My email address is KimberlyAnnHarris@aducaconsulting.co. General inquiries, you see where those inquiries can be filtered. And we always, always invite you to check us out on our social media platforms, LinkedIn, Facebook, and the social media site previously known as Twitter, now X. Check us out, and we'll be definitely here to have additional conversation with you about this topic and related topics in the not too distant future.